They find the bodies in the rubber at first light. 3 men, arms still through their weapon slings, caught in the straight rows between the trees as if frozen mid-step. The Viet Cong commander's political officer walks among them without speaking. Dew glitters on the rubber leaves overhead. The trunks stand in perfect order, white and gray, like thin pillars in a ruined hall. There are no bullet-raked trunks, no grenade fragments in the bark, no sign of a firefight. Just torn flesh, shallow, jagged wounds, small, clean craters in the red earth where steel punched in and out again. He kneels by the nearest body. Fingers brush a shard of metal half buried in the soil. He rolls it between his thumb and forefinger. Heavy, deformed, artillery. He stands and looks back along the plantation. The trail of his battalion is written plainly in the ground, hundreds of sandal prints, some still filled with water from the night's rain. A smear of mud on a trunk where a man slipped. The marks of ammunition crates rested briefly against a tree. They had moved all night, no helicopters overhead, no American patrols pushing them, no contact, no flares. And then, in the last hour before dawn, shells. 2 salvos, no more. The first bracketed the head of the column, the second smashed into the center. No ranging shots, no wild overs, just sudden violence in the trees and then silence again. Now he stands in the aftermath and tries to understand. Americans, his political officer suggests quietly. Radar, magic. He does not answer. He walks to the edge of the plantation. The ground rises gently into scrub and low jungle. A small knoll, barely a wrinkle on the map, sits 300 meters away, thick with undergrowth, good cover. He says, "Search there." The security platoon moves with caution. They comb the scrub, then they find it. Shallow scrapes in the earth, no more than body depth, a few clipped branches, a narrow slit cleared between roots, perfectly aligned on the track through the rubber. In one pit, under kicked leaves, a small square of gray card lies forgotten, numbered, marked in grease pencil, a fragment of an artillery target sheet. For 3 days, unseen men have lain here, watching, counting, listening to the battalion breathe, march, curse, sleep. 300 meters. Close enough to see who carried mortar base plates. Close enough to watch officers gather in whispered conferences. Close enough to note the exact time the battalion filed into the plantation. The terror is not the shells. The terror is knowing that for 72 hours, while you believed yourself invisible under the trees, someone close by watched you live and decided who among you would die. This is the story of the 300-meter war, the story of the Australian SAS observation posts, the ones the Viet Cong battalions almost never saw but never forgot.
On a map, the war around New Dat is just lines and symbols, contours, streams, villages marked by neat little circles, rubber plantations shaded in gray rectangles. On the ground, it is weight. Heat hangs in the air like a wet blanket. Humidity crawls under your clothes and sits there, heavy and sour. Boots never quite dry. Socks sour after the first day and stay that way. The jungle changes with every kilometer. In some places, triple canopy presses down. Huge trunks soar up and vanish in a tangle of branches and leaves. Beneath them, a middle story of broad leaves catches what little light gets through. At the bottom, saplings, ferns, and vines knit together into a wall of green. Sunlight becomes a rumor. Vision collapses to 20 or 30 meters. Even then, everything is texture and shadow. In other places, the trees give way suddenly to rubber. Regular, artificial. Trunks planted in straight lines, 8–10 meters apart. The ground between them is relatively clear, covered in fallen leaves and short grass. It feels open until you realize that every direction looks the same. Distance becomes difficult to judge. Men appear and disappear between the pillars of wood like figures moving through bars. Then there are the in-between spaces, low ridges running like knuckles under the jungle skin. Creek lives cut into the earth, their banks collapsed into ragged edges. Patches of tall grass, thickets of bamboo that rattle in the slightest breeze. These are the places where observation posts live. A small rise that gives you a view into a valley floor. A fold of ground that lets you see a track without being seen from it. A clump of scrub halfway up a slope that hides you from anyone looking up, but lets you see men moving down in front of you. Sound in this landscape is never straightforward. Artillery from New Dat rolls over the hills like distant thunder, sometimes close, sometimes faint. A branch cracking nearby can be a lizard or a man. Bird calls start and stop for reasons you must learn. A snake, a monkey, or a patrol. The jungle hums and hisses and drips. In an O-key, that noise is both cover and threat. It hides the small sounds you cannot help but make, the shift of cloth, the click of a safety, the soft murmur into a radio handset. But it also hides them. You cannot see every gap between trees. You will not hear every footstep. Somewhere out there, men can move through the same noise toward you, as slowly and carefully as you moved into your hide. Visibility becomes a currency. 100 meters, clear view down a track. 200 across a river flat. 300 along the rows of rubber. The 300-meter war is fought at the edge of that envelope. Too close, and you might smell their cooking smoke. Too far, and you cannot see if the man carrying that pack is hauling rice or a mortar tube. The battlefield is not just earth and trees. It is distance. It is angle. It is the difference between what you can see and what you can survive.
Modern armies move with noise. American battalions in Vietnam advance with helicopters overhead, armored personnel carriers grinding along red dirt roads, radios chattering on multiple nets. Artillery batteries sit behind them, guns already laid on pre-planned targets. If contact comes, the response is a storm. Mortars, 105s, 155s, jets dropping iron and napalm. Australian infantry companies, fewer and lighter, still work the same grammar. Platoons push out from Nui Dat and its fire support bases. Patrols probe villages, plantation edges, creek lines. Each movement is covered by guns. Maps fill with arcs, reference points, and grid squares. It is a war of force applied over space. But the jungle absorbs sound and hides shapes. A battalion can sweep an area and find nothing but abandoned fireplaces. A company can patrol for days without seeing more than a handful of enemy. And yet the enemy are there. To hit what matters, you must first see what matters. So commanders want eyes forward. They want to know, where does that main force battalion rest between marches? Which tracks do they use at night? Where is the real staging point behind that propaganda village? Helicopters and aerial photography can only see so much through the canopy. The answer, again and again, is a small patrol that will go out, lay low, and watch. The SAS do not deploy as spearheads for assaults. They do not hold ground. They are sent ahead or to the flanks or deep to one side of the main effort. 4, sometimes 5 or 6 men, 1 radio, enough ammunition to defend themselves, enough food and water to stay for days. Their job is not to fight. Their job is to turn stillness into firepower. A company commander can call for artillery on a suspected enemy position. An SASOP lets him call for artillery on a known one. Exact location, exact strength, exact timing. So while the big units move, one small unit stops, digs shallow pits, pulls foliage over their backs, clears a slit through the greenery just wide enough for a pair of binoculars or a rifle sight, and then lies there. They become the first link in a chain that stretches back through the jungle, up through radio masts at Nui Dat, into fire direction centers with map boards and grease pencils, out again to guns whose crews never see what they are killing. Firepower at one end, stillness at the other. The 300-meter war is fought in that tension.
The Australian Special Air Service Regiment did not invent the observation post in Vietnam, but Vietnam refined it. The regiment's roots run back to the Second World War SAS, raiders on desert airfields and behind German lines. But its character is shaped in Malaya and Borneo in the 1950s and early 1960s. There, small patrols move for days in dense jungle against communist insurgents. They learn the basics. Stay small, stay quiet, stay hidden. Say little on the radio, but say it clearly. They learn that the most valuable thing they can bring back is not a prisoner or a captured weapon. It is a clear picture. Where do they live? Where do they hide their rice? Who visits them? Which tracks do they use and when? They work with indigenous trackers and with Australian bushmen. Learn how to read ground and foliage. Learn how to build hides that survive not for hours, but for days and weeks. By the time Vietnam comes, the SAS has a culture of patience. Selection strips away those who cannot stand isolation or boredom or the kind of fear that never spikes into a rush but just hangs there, steady, for days. Training drills in the details. How to scrape a depression in the earth without leaving a recognizable spoil heap. How to redirect water runoff so a sudden storm does not fill your pit and give you away. How to cut live branches and keep them alive over your head as part of your camouflage. Doctrinally, the role is clear. SAS patrols provide long-range reconnaissance, deep beyond the infantry's patrol lines. Close target reconnaissance, eyes on specific locations before operations. Artillery and air support observation, spotting, adjusting, and confirming strikes. The close observation post is at the intersection of all three. It is long-range in isolation, close target in focus, and the nerve center of a kill chain that ends at an artillery gun trail. Patrol commanders are empowered to decide where to sight an OP, how long to remain, when to leave. Higher headquarters give them tasks, grids, desired information, support. Doctrine gives them patterns. Always have a secondary and tertiary hide. Always plan a way out before you crawl in. Always assume the enemy will eventually search where you would. The Viet Cong, for their part, develop their own response. They have no formal OP doctrine in Western terms, but they have decades of local experience. They know how to place sentries where tracks enter plantations, how to climb a tree and look for unnatural shapes in the foliage, how to move patrols out from base perimeters to check knolls and creek banks for signs of foreign presence. As SASOPs begin to hurt them, bringing artillery onto rest halts, catching columns mid-march, they add a new habit. Whenever they stop somewhere they know the Australians can reach, they search the surrounding ground. The doctrine of the OP and the doctrine of the counter-OP grow together. The 300-meter war is not one side's invention. It is a conversation written in dirt and shrapnel between two professional enemies.
You move the last 50 meters on your stomach. Arms and legs pull you forward through damp leaf litter. Your rifle lies flat along your forearms, muzzle carefully kept off the ground. Every push makes the fabric on your elbows rasp quietly. You force yourself to go slower, even though your heart is beating harder.
The knoll ahead is nothing special, just a low rise with a tangle of roots and scrub. But from the aerial photograph back at Nui Dat, from the contours on the map, from the recce you did yesterday, you know that this is the place. From here, 300 meters downslope, you can see the track enter the rubber plantation. You can see 70, maybe 80 meters of the trees inside, enough to catch a company in march formation, enough to see the tail end of a battalion. The patrol commander touches your boot. You stop. You lie still while he crawls past. He sinks his bayonet into the earth once, twice, testing the soil. Then he gives the sign. This is it. You and the others begin to dig. No big movements, no wild flinging of dirt. You scoop and push, passing soil back in small controlled loads. It goes into sandbags, into ponchos, into natural hollows. You shape the earth, not fight it. Soon there is a shallow depression, just deep enough that when you lie in it, your body sits below the natural line of the ground. Over you, branches and cut foliage go into place. The leaves are turned so their top sides face up, matching the rest of the jungle floor. A few live plants are bent sideways, their roots left in place so they don't wither in hours and give you away. You clear your firing slit. No more than the width of your hand. You push aside 2 roots, move a thin branch, and suddenly the world opens. You can see the track, the edge of the plantation, the first 3 rows of rubber trees marching away in their eerie, regular columns. You sight through your rifle, through binoculars, through the patrol's small spotting scope. The picture is clean. This will be home. You slide into the pit. Your chest meets the earth. It is cooler than the air and wet. You position your rifle so the muzzle sits just inside the lip of the shadow. You find a comfortable, not comfortable, tolerable angle for your neck. You feel the first ant crawl onto your hand. You do not move to flick it away. Time starts to stretch. Daylight hardens. Heat builds. Your shirt clings to your back and stomach. The smell of your own sweat mixes with the sourness of damp soil and old vegetation. You drink water in tiny sips. You eat when told. Cold ration meat and biscuits broken into quiet mouthfuls. No tins clattering, no wrappers crinkling loud enough to carry. You fight cramps one muscle at a time. Flex your toes, relax your calf. Shift your weight in millimeters, not inches. Hours pass. The first group appears late in the day. 4 men, rifles on their shoulders, moving at an easy pace down the track. You watch them without breathing too deeply. You count. You note weapons. You look for scouts or simply couriers. You murmur into the patrol commander's ear. He nods, and your observations become short phrases into the radio. 4 enemy, small arms only, moving south. During the night you listen more than you see. Feet on earth, quiet talking, the splash of a crossing in the creek you cannot quite see. Once the squeak of rubber on bark as someone leans against a tree in the plantation. You sleep in snatches, 40 minutes, then you're awake again while someone else's eyes rest. After a day and a night, you smell yourself, sour, rancid. You wonder if the enemy can smell you too. After 2 days, the pit feels smaller. On the 3rd day, when the first elements of a large enemy unit begin to file into your field of view, you realize that everything, the digging, the cramps, the hunger, the ache, was just the ante. Now the game begins.
It starts with a corridor on the map. Analysts at Nui Dat spread reports across a table. Small contacts here, a prisoner's statement there, a captured notebook with rough sketches of tracks, aerial photos pinpricked with grease pencil. All of it suggests one thing. A main force Viet Cong battalion is using a loose corridor of tracks and plantations to move in and out of Phuoc Tuy. Not every night, not even every week, but enough.
If that corridor can be understood, it can be cut. An SAS patrol is tasked to confirm. Their mission order is simple in words, complex in execution. Insert northwest of suspected route. Establish observation on key choke points. Confirm enemy strength, type, and movement patterns. Remain undetected. Adjust artillery as required if large formations present. 5 men board the helicopter in the pre-dawn gray. Faces are shadowed with cam cream. Packs are heavy. Radios checked and rechecked. Claymores and smoke grenades hang in neat, disciplined order. The flight is low and fast. Jungle whips past them in blurred shades of green and black. The pilot flares into a small clearing with barely enough space for the rotor disc. The men jump before the skids fully settle. The helicopter is gone almost before they straighten up. Suddenly, the war becomes small and personal. For the rest of this mission, their world is limited to what they can see, hear, and reach on foot. They move. Slowly. The first day is for getting into position. They avoid main tracks, slipping instead through secondary paths and animal trails. Where they must cross open space, they do it one at a time, ghosting between shadows. By late afternoon, they reach the plantation edge that intelligence has marked as likely. The ground rises slightly, just enough to give them an overlook. A small creek line cuts across the track ahead, forcing any column to compress and slow as it negotiates the bank. It is perfect. They dig in. Day 1 in the OP sees only small groups. A section, a handful of armed men with a bicycle and a couple of villagers in tow. Runners, couriers, local force. The patrol watches, logs, reports. The battalion arrives on day 2, not with a roar, but as a long, steady current of men. From their slit in the earth, the SAS watched the first company appear between the rubber trees. 20, 30, 40 men. Then another cluster, and another. They count. Each man is a tick, each heavy weapon a mark in a mental margin. They note who seems to give orders, who carries radio sets, who lugs mortar base plates and ammunition tubes. They track timing. How long between the head of the column and its tail? How long does the battalion take to clear the choke point at the creek? Details that seem small now will matter later when someone at Nui Dat asks, how fast can they move from there to us? The battalion halts beyond the edge of sight. But noise and glimpses through the gaps in the trees tell the story. They are setting a temporary harbor area, digging hasty pits, stringing up ponchos, lighting small, disciplined cooking fires screened under foliage. The OP watches through the day and into the night. Every few hours, a short coded transmission goes out. Enemy strength, estimated identity, activity. Behind them, miles away, artillery battery commanders and task force staff read those brief notes and adjust plans. The battalion is not a rumor anymore. It is a plotted force. On the 3rd morning, the order comes down. Guns will engage at your direction. Infantry standing by to exploit. Confirm when maximum density reached. The OP watches the battalion forming up to move. They see men streaming back onto the track, into the plantation rows. They wait. Let the majority file into the killing ground. Then and only then do they begin corrections. Battery, this is target, enemy battalion. Grid as sent. Fire 1. Adjust. The first shells fall long. Treetops explode in sudden fountains of splinters. Men begin to run. The OP watches, calm voices over pounding hearts. Drop 200. Repeat. Shells walk back toward the track. Add 50. Left 100. Fire for effect. Now the plantation truly erupts. From the OP, they see men die for cover that doesn't exist. Mortar crews scramble to move their tubes and are torn apart beside them. An officer runs, shouting, and disappears in a flash and a spray of earth. The patrol keeps talking, adjusting, watching where clumps of enemy try to break away, feeding grids to walk the guns after them. They never fire their own weapons. When Australian infantry companies later move through the area, they find the signs, bodies, Blood, shredded webbing, smashed mortars, abandoned ammunition. Captured documents confirm what the watchers already guessed. This battalion was tasked to strike deeper into the province. The plan dies in the rubber. From a shallow scrape of earth, 300 meters away, 5 men changed an entire operation.
In most soldiers' minds, discipline with the trigger is about not firing wild, not wasting ammunition, not shooting when friendlies are near. For an OP, fire discipline is something else. It is the conscious decision to hold back even when you can see the whites of the enemy's eyes through your scope. 300 meters is nothing for a rifle. A trained marksman with a steady rest can punch shot after shot into a man's chest at that range. From an OP, you can pick your targets. The officer with the map case, the radio operator with the whip antenna, the man carrying a mortar round. Killing any of them would be easy, and almost always wrong. Because the moment you fire, you do several things. You reveal that the enemy is being watched from that direction. You force him to move, scatter, change his habits. You risk drawing patrols, mortars, or even a full-scale assault toward your small, isolated position. You also cut off your own eyes. An OP lives by the information it can pass. One dead officer is a tactical gain. 3 days of continuous reporting on his unit's strength, movement, discipline, and morale is an operational gain. So patrol commanders drill into their men a simple hierarchy. See, report, decide. Only then, if necessary, shoot. Shooting without that decision is failure. Of course, there are exceptions. If an enemy patrol stumbles almost literally onto the hide, boots within meters of boots, then silence is suicide. Then the claymores go, then the rifles crack, then the OP becomes an ambush site, and the patrol's mission changes in an instant from watching to surviving. But those are emergencies, not aims. Most of the time, fire discipline in the 300-meter war means letting men walk in front of your muzzle unmolested. It means swallowing the urge to pull the trigger when you watch a mortar crew relax, light cigarettes, lean against their tubes. It means knowing that your real weapon is the radio handset pressed against your ear and the quiet voice at the other end saying, "Battery ready," at your command. Sometimes that discipline has to be enforced even against your own instincts. One veteran patrol commander would later admit, "There were days when we were looking at blokes we knew had been laying mines and shooting at our infantry mates. 37, 40 degrees, we're lying in our own sweat, watching them, knowing we could smack a few. But you don't. Because the job is not revenge. The job is to help the whole brigade, not satisfy yourself for 5 seconds. In the 300-meter war, patience kills more effectively than bullets.
The Song Rai runs brown and slow through much of Phuoc Tuy. Its banks are lined with trees and brush, hiding countless small landings and crossings. Intelligence points to one particular bend where the current is shallow enough for a loaded man to wade and the banks are cut low enough to climb even with a weapon in pack. It is a natural funnel. An SAS patrol is sent to watch it. They move in by night, keeping off known tracks. At first light, they find their perch, a small terrace just above the near bank, hidden by a wall of ferns and scrub. From here, they can see the crossing point, the far approach track, and a section of river either side. The first day brings only trickles. 2 men with rifles and a single pack. 3 more later, carrying fishing gear as cover. A small supply party that seems to be local force. Each crossing is logged, times, direction, gear. The second night, movement builds. Lines of shadow gather on the far bank.
Through their optics, the OP can see more men. 10, 20, 30. It grows. Soon, a company-sized element waits in the trees. Some men carry mortar tubes wrapped in cloth. Others haul boxes that, by their weight and the way they are guarded, can only be ammunition. The patrol commander updates his report. Enemy company, likely main force forming to cross. Suggest interdiction. This time, Nui Dat does not hesitate. You are cleared to engage. Artillery in support. Your control. The patrol shifts mental gears. Claymores that had been placed for last-ditch self-defense the day before are carefully rewired and re-aimed. 2 cover the rocks in midstream. 1 covers the near-bank exit. A 4th, hastily laid, angles along the far-bank approach. Each man checks his arcs. Each rifle is loaded with a full magazine. A spare mag lies ready at the elbow. They wait. Men begin to cross. Dark shapes move into the shallows, holding their rifles high. Packs glisten wet on their backs. The crossing is narrow. They bunch up without meaning to. The OP commander waits until the picture in his scope shows maximum density. Then, he squeezes the clacker. The river mouth erupts. Claymore fragments shred men on the rocks. Some vanish under the water, not coming up. Others are flung back against the banks. Shouts of shock and pain cut across the water. Before anyone can recover, the patrol radio operator is already talking, voice low and steady despite the adrenaline. Shot, over. Target on. Fire for effect. Artillery rounds arrive less than a minute later, air ripping as they come in. The far bank disappears in flash and smoke. Trees split. Men who tried to retreat upriver suddenly found themselves running into the fall of shot. The OP stays calm. Left 100, add 50, repeat. They are not excited. They note, adjust, watch enemy reactions, where they run, where they freeze, which way survivors try to break. The barrage lasts only a few minutes, long enough. When it lifts, the river holds bodies wedged against rocks and roots. The far bank is torn and cratered. The patrol does not celebrate. They watch for counter-movement, for probing patrols looking for the ambushers. When they finally slip away in the small hours before dawn, they leave behind nothing to mark where they lay except shallow impressions and a few shards of wire the enemy may or may not ever find. Later, captured documents talk of a severe loss suffered by a unit attempting to move heavy weapons. The crossing is described in dry staff language. The fear felt by the men hit by invisible fire from across the river is not. In the OP log, it is 6 lines. In reality, it is a company's worth of men smashed in a few minutes by a handful of watchers 300 meters away.
For every successful op, there is a mission that comes close to disaster. By 1969, Viet Cong and local force units around Phuoc Tuy know that the Australians like to sit and watch. Whenever they move near Nui Dat, they assume someone may be lying in a hole nearby. Whenever artillery falls with suspicious accuracy, they send patrols into the surrounding jungle afterward, searching knolls, creek banks, and plantation edges. One SAS patrol has been on station for 3 days above a minor track network. They have watched small groups, logged timings, and identified a pattern of movement suggesting a larger unit will soon pass through. On the morning of day 4, the jungle's tone changes. It is subtle. Birds that normally chatter at first light stay quiet a little longer. A breeze carries a faint human smell, sweat, tobacco, wood smoke from upwind. Then, far to the left, someone steps on a stick. The crack echoes in a way that does not sound like an animal. The patrol commander slowly raises his binoculars. Through gaps in the foliage, he sees them, men, moving not along the track, but perpendicular to it, spread out, weapons ready, eyes scanning the ground and the trees. a search line. They are not blindly wandering, they move with purpose. One points toward a likely hide site, a small hump of ground similar to the one the SAS occupy. The commander has a choice: stay, hope they miss the hop, or move, knowing that any movement now risks making the exact sound the searchers are straining to hear. He chooses to split risk. Quietly, over a few minutes, the patrol begins to peel back from the op, one man at a time, in slow, controlled crawls. Each vacated space is left looking occupied. A helmet shape under a bush, a rifle-length stick set where a barrel was, bits of webbing arranged to catch the eye. 15 minutes later, the patrol lies in a secondary hide they prepared on arrival, slightly higher, slightly further back. From here, they can still see much of the track and their old position. The VC close in on the original op. Through their optics, the Australians watch the search unfold. Men fan out around the hummock. A tracker kneels, fingers tracing the soil. He finds what he expects: disturbed earth, cut foliage. He shouts. Grenades tumble into the empty scrape. Explosions batter the front of the hide. Then, for a few minutes, the searchers pour fire into a position where, had timing gone differently, 5 Australians would be dying. Now, those same Australians lie just out of sight, teeth clenched, listening to rounds crack through vegetation 100 meters downslope. Eventually, the enemy realizes the op is empty. There is angry shouting. Men jab bayonets into the earth. The patrol commander, watching from above, sees one man slam his helmet against a tree in frustration. The VC searchers pull back, wary now of a possible counter-ambush. The patrol has survived by inches in planning. When they exfiltrate that night, their report contains not only the movement pattern they were sent to observe, but a stark warning. Enemy now conducting deliberate searches of likely op sites after artillery engagements. Treat all choke points as potential counter-recon zones. The 300-meter war is no longer one-sided. Every hole you dig, they may find, even if you are no longer in it. Every time you watch them, they may be watching for you.
Artillery leaves visible scars. Craters, splintered trunks, torn bodies. Observation leaves something harder to see. Doubt. As SASOPs direct more accurate fire on Viet Cong movements and resting places, a pattern forms in enemy minds. They begin to connect events. A column hit in a rubber plantation far from any known outpost. A rest halt in a creek line smashed an hour after men unstrapped their packs. A river crossing turned into a killing ground with terrifying precision. Unseen eyes must be watching. Captured reports mention small enemy reconnaissance units whose locations cannot be determined. Mentions of foreign long-range patrolling elements begin to appear as explanations whenever things go wrong. Company and battalion commanders adapt. They alter routines. No more using the same track every time. No more resting in the same clearings. No more moving large groups through plantations in daylight without advanced sentries scanning high ground for unnatural shapes. They increase counter-reconnaissance measures. Search patrols fan out from suspected target areas after operations. Likely OP positions are checked before troops move into them. Potential vantage points near meetings or mustering points are pre-swept. And still, sometimes, shells fall, because the jungle is large and the SAS are patient. For ordinary Viet Cong soldiers, the psychological effect is simple. In some zones, they no longer feel alone. A veteran later described it like this. You would be marching, just doing the normal thing, smoking, talking quietly. Then you hear the first whistling of shells. After a while you knew, if the first ones are already on top of you, someone has been looking at you. It made you feel naked. Even when there was no fighting, you felt like there were eyes in the trees. Fear becomes habitual caution. Men move more slowly. They tire more quickly. They sleep less deeply. Leaders worry that any large assembly will attract death from above. Plans are delayed. Routes are changed. Sometimes operations are canceled. This is the 300-meter war's greatest victory. Not the number of enemy killed in any one barrage, but the thousands of decisions made more cautiously, more fearfully, because of the possibility of a silent OP nearby. The Viet Cong still own the jungle in numbers, but they no longer own it completely in confidence.
Special operations units rarely dominate raw statistics. Their headcount is too small. The SAS in Vietnam are no different. At any given time, perhaps 50 or 60 troopers are deployed in theater. Of those, only a handful of patrols, 4 or 5 men each, are forward at once. Yet their patrol logs run to hundreds of missions. Duration. Many OP-based missions last between 5 and 10 days. Some stretch longer, with clever resupply and careful rationing. Reach. Patrols operate across the breadth of Phuoc Tuy province and sometimes beyond, often in areas where no other Allied soldiers set foot that week. Contact. Direct firefights are relatively rare compared to the number of times the patrols lie within 300 to 500 meters of enemy forces. Often, the enemy never knows. Enemy casualties directly inflicted by SAS small arms and mines number in the hundreds across the whole deployment. But that is only part of the ledger. Artillery and airstrikes guided by SAS observation account for far more. Exact figures are hard to pin down. Bodies removed, wounded crawling away, jungles swallowed by blast. But internal assessments credit SAS-directed fire with breaking numerous company and battalion-sized operations before they fully formed. SAS losses in this environment, though painful, are low. Only a small number of troopers are killed or seriously wounded throughout the campaign, despite the constant risk of being within a few hundred meters of enemy formations. The ratio between time spent in danger and casualties taken is testimony to discipline, concealment, and the strict doctrine of not fighting unless forced. If you tried to quantify the 300-meter war, you might do it like this. Hours spent in OPs, many thousands. Major enemy movements observed, dozens upon dozens. Artillery missions adjusted from OPs, significant, often decisive in local engagements. Patrols compromised in OP, very few given the exposure. But numbers alone cannot express the value of a single line in a patrol report that reads, at 3:15 hours, approx battalion strength enemy force moving southeast through rubber at GR XXXX, mortars and heavy weapons noted. That one line can redirect a battalion's deployment, re-aim guns, and change what will be written in someone else's statistics tomorrow.
From a distance, the work of an OP sounds almost static. Lie in a hole, watch, report. Up close, it is a grind. Your world shrinks to the damp earth under your chest, the leaves in front of your face, the narrow slice of landscape framed in your sights. The jungle presses in. Heat rash blossoms under your webbing. Skin softens and cracks where sweat and grime never dry. Tropical ulcers open on shins and feed on constant moisture. Insects are relentless. Flies crawl at your lips and eyes. Ants discover your position and build small highways over your hands and gear. Mosquitoes whine around ears and in the folds of your neck. You swat only when absolutely necessary, and even then with slow, controlled movements. Sleep is fragmentary. You close your eyes for 30 minutes while someone else watches. Wake with a start when a root you're lying on sends a spike of pain up your spine. Roll slightly, resettle, stare again through the slit. The mind plays tricks. You start to imagine patterns, faces in the bark of trees, movement where there is none. You have to discipline yourself.
See what's there, not what fear suggests. The responsibility is heavy. If you miss a movement, a column may slip past. If you misjudge a unit's strength, you may bring too little or too much fire on them, risking friendly troops or missing an opportunity. The radio becomes a lifeline. Its weight is not just physical. Each transmission you send carries consequence. When you say battalion, people listen. When you say recommend engage, guns move. Inside the patrol, bonds tighten. You share water, knowing a resupply may not come. You share food, trading hard biscuits for someone else's meat tin. You share small comforts, a dry pair of socks, or a better spot to rest your head for an hour. You also share fear. It might be silent, buried, but it is there. Fear that the enemy will find your hide. Fear that a single careless movement, a badly timed cough, a glint of glass will bring armored columns of shouting men, grenades, and point-blank fire down on top of you. Some troopers cope with humor, low-voiced comments, dark jokes. Others withdraw into a quiet focus. Many years later will remember not the firefights, but the stillness. The long hours of lying under a poncho rigged as a roof, listening to rain hammer above as they waited for a patrol that never came. Or the moment when 100 armed men marched through their field of view and they realized that only a few centimeters of dirt and brush separated them from discovery. On the other side, Viet Cong soldiers carry their own scars. They grow tired of knowing that whenever they move near certain areas, they might be under observation. They remember friends ripped apart by artillery when they thought themselves safe in a stand of trees. They recall searching for OPs and finding shallow, still warm pits that tell them they were watched, recently, closely, intimately. Between watcher and watched, a strange bond forms, not of sympathy, but of shared understanding. Each knows what it is to be 300 meters from death, whether holding the radio or hearing the first shell.
When the Australian task force leaves Nui Dat and the last SAS patrol exfiltrates Vietnamese jungle, the OPs they dug are abandoned. Rain falls, leaves gather, termites and roots reclaim the shallow pits. The knolls and creek banks go back to being just features of the land. The rubber plantations continue their quiet rows. But the idea of the 300-meter war does not disappear. Inside the SAS regiment, Vietnam's OP missions become part of its internal legend. Training programs analyze them. Young troopers hear about the patrol that watched a battalion form under the trees and broke it with artillery. About the OP that lay quietly while a searchline tore apart its empty shell. About the river crossing that became a trap. They learn the principles. Close enough to see, far enough to live. Stillness as a weapon. Fire only when it serves the mission, not the moment. In later decades, operations in deserts, mountains, and cities apply these lessons with different terrain but the same logic. Observation hides in wadis and on rocky ridges. It hides in ruined buildings and on barren hills. The distances change. The technology improves. Thermal sights, better radios, drones even. But somewhere, someone still lies in a scrape in the dirt, watching a road, a compound, or a valley, 300 meters from men who do not know they are seen. On the Vietnamese side, the memory lives differently. Former Viet Cong commanders and soldiers recall small Australian teams with a respect often stripped of politics. They talk of operations disrupted, of movements hit in transit, of nights when artillery came down as if summoned by an invisible hand. Some remember finding OPs themselves, shallow depressions with a view straight into their camps, lined with cut branches and discarded ration fragments. In their minds, those pits are associated with a particular kind of unease, the feeling of having been examined without knowing it. The jungle itself has no opinion. It outlives tactics, units, and wars alike.
Trees grow, fall, rot, trails fade, new paths form. But in the human record, in dusty reports, in veteran stories, in the training lessons of modern special forces, the 300-meter war remains. It reminds soldiers that power is not only in the gun that fires, but in the eye that chooses when it should. In the rubber plantations of Phuoc Tuy, in the shadowed folds of jungle hills, a handful of Australian SAS patrols proved that a man lying silent in a shallow scrape 300 meters away can alter the fate of a battalion he never touches. In those shadows, they turned stillness into dominance. In that narrow band of distance between safety and discovery, they became the unseen hinge on which entire campaigns turned.